This is ABC-7 Extra.
It is Sunday, November 6th. Welcome to ABC-7 Extra. Good evening, I'm Stephanie Guadian. In 2 days, Americans will choose a new president. It has been a busy weekend for candidates, Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump. Neither candidate showing signs of giving up tonight. It is a 48-43% race between the two, with Clinton barely touching 48% by rounding in the latest ABC News Washington Post tracking poll. Our political and election experts are standing by right now with their insight. They'll also be taking your comments and your questions. Remember, you can email us right now, ABC7Extra at KVIA.com, or just pick up the phone, give me a call, 915-496-1771. You can also tweet me at Guadian ABC7. Make sure to use the hashtag ABC7 Extra so we can find you. There has been a major development in the race for the White House. The FBI director releasing his finding in the most recent part of that Hillary Clinton email investigation. It comes as Clinton and Donald Trump are both barnstorming battleground states across the country. ABC's Mary Bruce is in Washington with more.
The final countdown of the campaign, and Hillary Clinton has a new reason to smile. This letter, a last-minute November surprise. The FBI tonight is standing by its decision not to bring a criminal case against Clinton for her use of a private email server. It's been 9 days since FBI Director James Comey rocked the campaign by announcing a renewed investigation into Clinton's emails. Now he's informing congressional leaders that based on our review, we have not changed our conclusions that we expressed in July with respect to Secretary Clinton. Those conclusions that Clinton should not be prosecuted.
We're glad that this matter is resolved.
On the trail Sunday, Clinton did not immediately address the news.
I hope Ohio will turn out in the biggest recorded vote in history on Tuesday.
The Democratic nominee instead calling on her star supporters like NBA champion LeBron James.
And I was around a community that was like, our vote doesn't matter, but it really does. It really does.
Clinton is gaining ground in our latest ABC News Washington Post tracking poll, up 48-43 against Donald Trump. Trump ignoring the FBI news during a stop in Minneapolis.
Don't vote for her. She'll be a lousy president anyway, believe me.
Trump making the most of his weekend push alone, targeting 5 states, including one where polls show he's already well ahead.
We weren't going to come back to Iowa. They said, Mr. Trump, you don't have to. You're leading by so much, you don't have to. I said, what do you mean I don't have to? I want to go to Iowa, which is true.
This final stretch, a fight to the very finish. Mary Bruce, ABC News, Washington.
And joining us now is NMSU's Dr. Krista Slayton, a professor in government and an expert in building trust and transparency in government. Dr. Charles Bomer, the chair of UTEP's Political Science Department, and Dr. Richard Pineda, a UTEP expert in politics and media. Thank you all for staying up late and being with us tonight. A lot to talk about. Why don't we just start with the FBI's decision? How big of a relief is this for the Clinton campaign, or is it too late?
I think it's a pretty nice last-minute present from the FBI to provide this letter now instead of a few days after the election, in the sense. But I think a lot of the damage has been done in the sense that the narrative has been overly negative for quite a while. When you link up the idea of the Washington Insider with these kinds of publicly revealed emails now in this new millennia of electronics we're in, I think it's a lot of people have already not only made up their mind, but some that may have been undecided a week ago may have shifted one way or the other and may not necessarily shift back or even hear the news in time before they vote. But especially with the early voting, we had in the beginning people that early voted before the previous FBI's letter came out and this announcement, and then of course when it came out there were some people that early voted after that, so there were probably, if there was any shift, it probably went to Clinton at the beginning of early voting and then may have started to shift the other way.
And this is really one of the issues that she has struggled with during the whole campaign, one of trustworthiness, correct?
Right. And I think that it's linked inherently to the question of optics. So what you're dealing with are the things that are actually happening versus the media report. So if you recall, when the Comey letter came out, what it said was that they weren't reopening the investigation, only looking at the emails in the context of what had already been reported. What then happened, though, is the story really snowballed very quickly with Republicans on the Hill making the case this was a reopening of the investigation. And so I think the hardest thing for the Clinton campaign, at least in this period going into Tuesday, is really maintaining a certain level of image and also making sure that optics are straightforward. And I think that that's very hard to do if you're having to pivot against the system in some ways. I think on the flip side, the Trump campaign is dealing with optics in a different way. Famously, at the middle of this last week, his Twitter account was taken over by the campaign, which was a big deal because from an optics perspective, it was the tweets that got a lot of attention, especially the late night tweets about different things, Saturday Night Live, or people that he was unhappy with. And so that's actually become a talking point. So President Obama today in Florida used that as a point to actually chide Trump and the campaign. So I think this really is, this race to Tuesday is about optics and managing where these campaigns are at going into Tuesday. And as my colleague Dr. Bomer pointed out, if people have already voted, then this is really sort of last minute throwing everything but the sink at those people that have not come out and are waiting until Tuesday.
But Krista, your thoughts on this? What is this like for voters when all this information, different information, is thrown at them last minute?
I think it's very difficult for people to figure out what the truth really is. So they hear one story, then they hear another story, and it keeps going backwards and forwards. So I think a lot of people are really frustrated. They're ready for the rumors to end. They're ready for the facts to come out. And I think that, come Tuesday, we'll have a decision about who the voters really believe.
Are you surprised by the record early voting turnout?
Well, I think they've learned a lot from previous campaigns. You can look at poll numbers all day long, but what really counts is who comes out to vote. And I think there's been some concern that there's been an attempt to suppress the vote in many areas. So I think both campaigns have gone about really hitting the ground and making sure they get the voters out there. And I think they've done a really, really good job of it. So as disenchanted as voters may be or dissatisfied, I think we're going to see record turnout.
Okay. Donald Trump, as you mentioned, they took away the Twitter account, and also it seemed in recent weeks that he had really been sticking to the teleprompter more, sticking to his message. Has that been helping?
It's clearly, I think, been helping. And if we also look at the commercials they've been airing, I think they're quite effective in combining some of these negative narrative themes all into one, in the sense that it does paint Clinton as the Washington insider, and it has all the language and the symbolism of the corruption and everything that comes with that imagery, which he's tapped particularly well, I think, in this election cycle.
I think that the challenge is probably the difference between what you see in the ads, which is a very polished narrative for Trump, versus what you actually see on the campaign trail. So I think it's to his advantage to be as rigid as possible during these campaign stops, because I think what happens is it becomes an easy contrast to look at the way that the advertisements are portraying somebody that's different than what actually happens on the campaign trail. I think what's going to be hard, though, is to make up any of the ground that's been lost to minority voters, to women. I think we're going to see, probably for the first time in the last 20 years, a substantial turnout for Latino voters in crucial states. Already the data that people have been collecting in Nevada suggests that there's a firewall that's really built up, and that's largely from Latino voters. And so I think that's one of the things that, even as a polished image is sort of carrying the campaign into the last couple of days, I think that it's very hard to switch away from the baggage that the candidates bring in. So to that extent, I think it's right. I think it's very hard to put gild on the lily, I think.
Well, certainly there seems like there's a lot of ammunition out there which both sides are using to make negative ads with. We've had, the video with Trump and Billy Bush come out. We've had the Clinton emails. It feels as though it has been a nasty campaign. But Christy, you said historically looking, this has not been the nastiest.
Well, we've had several really nasty campaigns. The one that I think was the nastiest was in 1876. And you had two governors running against one another. Both of them were reform governors, and there was very little difference actually between them and their positions on issues. So it became very personal. So the personal attacks were just absolutely vicious against one another. So it was a Hayes-Tilden election. Tilden won more of the electoral votes but received a majority. And so it goes into a situation where they had not decided what happens when you have states that submit electoral votes, but they send two different slates. So Congress created a commission. It took them 4 months to decide who the president was actually going to be. in that case. So we've seen much worse. One person was accused of being insane and shooting his wife while he was insane, taking the pay of dead soldiers when they were on the field during the Civil War. Another one was accused of being a womanizer, a liar, a thief, and those accusations went back and forth. And it took us 4 months to know who the president was. So those are pretty bad days.
Okay, so a long history of that. But maybe what is new in this campaign is that we really do have a political outsider coming in. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Absolutely. I mean, we look back at past presidents. All of them have come through the system in some way. They've been military officers. They've been former vice presidents, senators. This is the first time you have a complete, total outsider. The other thing that's unique about this is that the Republican establishment has not embraced him fully. So even if Donald Trump gets elected, there's going to be some damage control that has to be done between him and the members of Congress, who are the leaders of Congress. So as a total outsider, the other thing is, as an outsider, it's a little bit different being president of the United States than as being CEO of a company. So what takes to be successful in a business might not be the same thing is successful within a government where you have to work with Congress. So that's going to be a challenging thing for him if he's elected on Tuesday.
Okay, well, we've got some people calling into the show. We want to go ahead and take our first caller. Caller, go ahead.
Hi, good evening. My question is this. Since you're going to be talking about transparency, is it possible that transparency can happen only if power is taken away, such as an example that Congress, they give themselves raises, they give themselves certain kind of benefits that, or they could opt out from Obamacare, etc. How can there be transparency if people make their own decisions that are beneficial only to them, but not to the general public, or vice versa? Thank you very much.
All right. Well, thank you very much for calling. I'll just throw that out to each of you. The issue is transparency, and how can there be more of it, I think, is what his question is.
Well, I think that the challenge is that the system, the way that it's set up, both from the electoral process and also a legislative process, is very hard to change. I mean, the simplest way to do that is going to be on Tuesday. I mean, and I think that's something that people forget, that systematic change and institutional change happens at the ballot box. I think that's why the messages about the election being rigged have been of great concern, because the notion of what we have is the power to be able to vote against somebody that whether it's a local election, a congressional election, or even in the presidency. So I would say that the concerns about transparency are warranted, but I also think that people are forgetting that their most powerful tool is literally at their hands on Tuesday to be able to make those kinds of changes, because I think that those changes then do have a roll-down effect, both because of the party and then also because of the candidates that are elected to office.
And I'd say that out of democratic nations, we have one of the most transparent systems in terms of elections of any nation in the entire world. And if you look at elections and voter registration officials, they have a really difficult task on their hands, because they know a lot of voters don't trust the system. And so you have poll watchers there, you have party representatives at every polling place, and I think that we really do have an open process in terms of the elections.
All right, and speaking of voters, thank you. You're watching ABC-7 Extra. El Paso reporting record-breaking early voting. We'll hear from an elections expert next and talk about some of the reasons why that happened. Remember, you can share your comments or questions by calling our comment line at 915-496-1771. You can also email us right now, ABC7Extra at KVIA.com, or tweet me at Guadian, ABC7. Just use the hashtag ABC7 Extra. You'll be right back. We'll be right back.
this election, you know, it's something so important not only for a lot of Americans, but for minorities who have the right to vote. And we're voting on our values. Trump is the only candidate that is aligned with our values.
Our city is a culture of peace. It's a culture of love, pride, respect. Donald Trump does not stand for any of that. I'm going to stand for those who cannot, my family, other people's families. It's an insult, honestly, that people here in the city, the border city of El Paso, are going to stand for something that directly affects all of us so negatively.
Clinton supporter crashing a Donald Trump rally at the corner of Sunland Park and Mesa in West El Paso today. One Trump supporter could be heard telling the Clinton supporter if he touched her, that would be an assault and he would go to prison. That Clinton supporter, by the way, only 17 years old, not even old enough to vote. But as you just heard, both sides are certainly passionate about their candidate. Welcome back to ABC-7 Extra. Joining us now, my guest, Lisa Wise, El Paso Elections Administrator, NMSU's Dr. Krista Slayton, professor in government, also an expert in building trust and transparency in government, and Dr. Richard Pineda, an expert in politics and media. Thank you all very much for joining us. Lisa, I want to start with you. Have there been any issues, complaints submitted to the Secretary of State regarding people who can't vote or were not allowed to vote?
So our county was made aware of one issue by the Secretary of State of a clerk who was not, was a little confused by the voter ID law. Mm-hmm. The judge at the location, however, did understand the law, and once we got that complaint, we spoke with them and they addressed it with the clerks and went back over the training.
All right, so we want voters to be clear on Tuesday. Can you talk a little bit about the different types of IDs that people can take with you and maybe alternate documents?
Sure, so there was a change to the voter ID law, which many people know, but some people don't. So now if you don't have one of the 7 forms of acceptable photo ID that we previously required, or if you're not able to reasonably obtain one, then you can bring a supporting document, and there's a couple different things. You can bring a paycheck stub, a utility bill, your voter certificate that we send out to you, a couple other items, and sign what we call a reasonable impediment form, which states why you were unable to grab one of the 7 forms of photo ID, and then you're able to vote a regular ballot on the machine.
Okay, and we're going to put a link on our website showing what forms of ID that people can bring. Again, how do you verify folks, though, who present maybe a bank statement or a utility bill that they are indeed citizens?
So in order to be able to use a supporting document and a reasonable impediment form, you have to also be in the poll book. So your initial registration requires either the last 4 digits of your Social Security number or your driver's license number. So when you register initially, that goes through the state. They back check that with the DPS and the SSA, different types of organizations to make sure that you are in fact, that does match up. So when if you're not in the poll book, then you would need to vote a provisional ballot.
Okay, and just your thoughts quickly on these changes for voters?
Well, I mean, things have been pretty efficient. I loved early vote and went to one of the sites, and everyone was not only aware, but I think that the county administrator's done a nice job making sure that on the poll sites themselves there's important information, both in terms of deportment once you're at the site, and then also the required information. So I think that that's really the first line, making sure that people have that information, and I think Lisa's office has done a great job this election season being prepared and also making sure that voters are knowing exactly what they need going in.
Okay, we have another call. Let's go ahead and take that now. Caller, go ahead.
Hi, I'm just here to talk about the general election. If you feel that both candidates are not on your vote, how would you feel about voting for a third party, for example? And how would you attack on people that think that voting for third party is a wasted vote? All right, thank you. Bye-bye.
Krista, you want to talk about that? If you don't, and certainly that is the case for a lot of voters out there, not particularly fond of either Hillary Clinton or Donald Trump. What do you think?
I'm one of the individuals that doesn't think you waste your vote by voting for a third party. I think it influences how the candidates respond when they become president. If you vote for a third-party candidate, that third-party candidate's not going to win this election.
Yeah.
But I do think it sends a political statement, and I think that we've seen changes throughout our history where third-party candidates have influenced major parties, and we've seen major parties make fundamental shifts because of third parties. So if you really are totally disenchanted with both candidates, and you really see an alternative out there that you like, I say go for it.
All right. Well, we still have a lot more to talk about. We got to get in a quick break. You're watching ABC-7 Extra. We'll be right back. deciding factor in this election. Thoughts?
Well, I think going back to Donald Trump's earlier comments about Mexicans and some of the other comments that a lot of us would think sound quite racist, that's been a very strong motivating factor. And when we talk about states, Dr. Pineda mentioned Nevada as being a battleground state where that may be a critical factor, but it's also put Arizona in play, which has been a very red state for a while, and the fact that that is a state that Hillary Clinton could win really would represent some of how much that has really helped the Democratic Party and produce an anti-Trump vote. And so that, along with some of the other demographics, has, I think, been a result of the alienation of various comments and tweets that Donald Trump has made.
And that is the case that some these candidates are spending time in states that they normally wouldn't.
That's right, and I think that the one thing that's been interesting from a media standpoint is that there's been a real uptick in the ads aimed at Latinos. So famously, Diego Luna released an ad earlier this week. Ostensibly, it's an ad for Jarritos, the soft drink beverage, but the ad essentially is a pro-Latino, pro-voting, anti-immigrant ad, or an ad sort of pushing back against that. George Lopez is in a Spanish-language ad that's running in this market now very heavily. So this is the first time that I think a concentrated effort for the kinds of advertisements this close to the election has really been pushed through. So I think you'll see that. I mean, the hope for Democrats is that they'll have big gains in Texas. I'm not quite sure that that's going to be realized come Tuesday, but I think you're going to see the first sort of tangible impact for Latino voters, and I think that that's going to be a real wake-up call both for the Democrats and the Republicans, and to a certain extent, as your caller before the break pointed out, third parties could probably gain some real traction if they looked at minority communities in the United States. But I do see Latinos playing a major role in this election.
Yeah. And some Trump supporters have said that people may say that they're not going to vote for Trump, but when they get in to actually do that vote in their own privacy, they might.
You know, that's one of the mysteries. I mean, the political scientists on the panel will tell you that knowing why people vote once they actually get in there is really ultimately hard to predict. But my sense is with the kind of early voting that's happened, with the fact that major newspapers who are traditionally conservative have pulled their endorsements or endorsing Clinton. The Chicago Sun-Times on Friday advertised or in their opinion piece referred to Trump as the barbarian at the gates. So I think that nationwide, I mean, there's a backlash that's palatable. If, despite that, there is a surprise on Tuesday, if there's a swell of Trump supporters, I think that would probably be surprising, given the fact that the public comment and the trend tends to be another way. But anything could happen. I mean, I think Tuesday will be, to a certain extent, exciting.
It will be. We have another call. We want to go ahead and take that. Caller, go ahead.
Yes, question is for the doctor. Explain to the public how the Electoral College participates in this election compared to the ballot box. Please let us know who votes for the president.
Very good.
Or elects the president.
Thank you very much for your call. Krista, good question.
So when you vote on Tuesday, you're not actually voting for Clinton or Trump or Johnson or any of the other candidates. You're actually voting for electors. And those electors have been chosen, it varies state by state. Those electors have been chosen by political parties or by candidates themselves. And so when you actually cast your ballot on Tuesday, you're voting for the elector. Those electors don't officially cast their ballot until December. And then when they cast their ballot in December, that then gets sent to the Congress. Those ballots are read in public, voted in public, and they're given to the President of the Senate, who happens to be the Vice President of the United States, which is Joe Biden. So there's a lot that can go on between that time. And some states, such as Texas, if an elector says, you know, I'm a Trump supporter, but I'm not going to vote for Trump, I'm going to vote for Johnson, they can do that with no penalty. So an elector is not bound by what the popular vote says. The other way the Electoral College works is that it's a winner-take-all system for all states in the country but 2 states. Nebraska and Maine proportionalize their electoral votes. So each candidate could get some potential votes from those 2 states. But every other state has a winner-take-all system. And that's decided at the state level, not at the national level. So the public does not like the fact that the Electoral College vote does not represent the popular vote. That's a state issue that needs to be resolved at the state level.
Okay, a lot of good information. I do have a question for you. It does seem that the Democratic Party has done some healing after Bernie Sanders and come together. What's going to have to happen for the Republican Party to heal after this?
Well, I mean, I think it's going to take quite a bit. I mean, even going into this week, I mean, the editor of Commentary, one of the conservative political journals, was talking on NPR, and his talking point was, in fact, that there is so much difficulty that the party may be in the wilderness for some time. I think that that's going to have an effect on down ballot races, and I think the real impact is not going to be in this presidential election. I think it's going to be in 2 years when we get to a midterm election, and I think that's really where, if the Republican Party has not figured out how to get things back in order, that they're going to have a very difficult time keeping some of the seats that they have. I think we'll see some interesting things on Tuesday, but I really think that for the Republican Party, they're going to need to figure out the direction of what they want to do in a very, very short period of time. Democrats have the same risk to a certain extent in the fact that there still is a wing of the party that feels left out because they were Sanders supporters, but I think that the threshold for the Democrats trying to get back on the same page is going to be much, much shorter, and I think if in fact Clinton wins on Tuesday, the Democrats then go in with a much larger advantage to try to make sure that unity is one of their top agenda items.
Okay, let's go ahead and take one more caller. I think we have one standing by.
Hi, I was just curious as to whether or not we want to get a motor voter law in Texas, or what we need to do to get a motor voter law in Texas so that people are automatically registered to vote once they get their driver's license. Thank you.
Did you hear that?
So I think the question was, does Texas have motor voter? And the answer is yes. When you register to vote in the state of Texas, you're registered to. You can indicate on your driver's license form that you do also wish to serve as a voter. I don't know if there are many states that don't have.
I think they're all required. I think it was part of HAVA legislation several years ago. Yeah. So in every state, you're supposed to have that opportunity when you could get your driver's license to say whether or not you also want to register to vote there.
Okay, good. Hope we answered that question for you. Moving ahead, sort of closing thoughts. What are you going to be watching for in these next few days and on Election Day?
Well, I think the challenge is what's going to happen once we know who the president's going to be. Because I think it's going to be difficult to see the nation heal. I think it's going to be difficult for some people to accept results regardless of which person it is. I think it's going to be difficult even within the own party that has the victory, how they're going to handle that victory. So that's going to be the challenge. It's not just what happens Tuesday, it's what happens in the coming months.
I'm particularly interested in the stay-home vote because based on some of the earlier comments and tweets by Donald Trump, he mobilized women and minority voters, and so I think that part of the electorate was very much galvanized to come out and vote, whereas there are a lot of Republicans that I think may actually stay home and vote. I think there's going to be a lot of people in both parties that hold their nose and vote for their nominees in that sense, but I would think that there may have been a little bit more of that stay-home vote, a little bit possible with Clinton in the last couple weeks, that may have decided that they're not going to vote for anybody or a third-party candidate. But I'm really curious to see if there's going to be a larger stay-home contingent for the Republican Party, and also this idea that the polling is not really accurate, as the Trump campaign and others have suspected, kind of like Brexit, which Brexit actually was predicted by most of the polls. That's kind of a bit of a recent myth. So it'll be interesting to see how accurate the polling is this time around with a candidate that is not very typical and has not run a conventional campaign.
I mean, I think it's going to be the issue of Latino voters, and then I think after the election, the question of how much media influence plays into elections and the difference between paying for advertising versus getting the earned or free coverage, which clearly made the Trump campaign. I think even the Republican Party is still trying to figure out how that happened and how their preferred candidates really sort of got lost in the static when it came to media coverage.
Either way, though, this election is going to stand out because we are potentially electing the first woman as president, but also, as you mentioned, just someone coming in from way outside. Do you think that could we see more outsiders jumping in future elections?
Well, I mean, I think it's interesting because I think the myth of the outsider is that this is somebody who has a tremendous amount of money, who had a tremendous amount of media savvy, who had a tremendous amount of social capital. So an outsider in the sense that they weren't a politician, but truly somebody who was part of the sort of popular culture narrative. So I think a true outsider, I would almost say that for the third parties, they face the outsider sort of syndrome more so because they are in the political process, but they lack either the infrastructure or the finance to be competitive at the national level. So I think that's that's probably more where we'll see that sort of name being used.
And we shall all see what happens in just a couple of days. Thank you all very much for staying and talking tonight. Again, we want to remind everybody, go ahead, get out and vote. Thank you for joining us. Remember, ABC-7 is the station to watch for complete election coverage, and that will start on Tuesday at 4 p.m. I'm Stephanie Guadian. Have a great night and a great week ahead.